In the ancient world, when empires clashed and kingdoms fell, young lives were often caught in the crossfire of history. This is the story of Daniel, a teenage boy whose faith would be tested in ways he never imagined. Far from his homeland, surrounded by a foreign culture that worshipped strange gods, Daniel would face choices that would define not just his own destiny, but influence the most powerful rulers of his time. His journey begins in the shadow of Jerusalem's destruction and leads to the very heart of Babylon's royal court. The year was dark for Jerusalem. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had come like a storm, and the holy city could not stand against his mighty army. As we read in Daniel chapter 1, verse 1, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The siege was brutal and swift, and soon the city walls crumbled under the weight of Babylonian power. But Nebuchadnezzar was not just a conqueror. He was a smart ruler who knew how to build his empire. Instead of simply destroying everything, he had a plan. Daniel 1:2 tells us that the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. The king took not only gold and silver, but something far more valuable: people. The Babylonian strategy was clever. They would take the brightest young minds from conquered nations and turn them into loyal servants of Babylon. Daniel 1:3-4 explains Nebuchadnezzar's command to Ashpenaz, his chief official. Bring some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He is to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. These weren't random prisoners. The king wanted the cream of the crop: royal blood, sharp minds, and strong bodies. Among the thousands of captives, only a select few would be chosen for this honor that felt more like a curse to those who loved their homeland. And there, among the chosen ones, stood 4 young Hebrew men whose names would echo through history. Daniel 1:6 introduces them. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These teenagers, probably around 15 or 16 years old, suddenly found themselves torn from everything they knew and loved. Life in the Babylonian court wasn't what these Hebrew boys expected. The Babylonians had a plan to completely transform them. Daniel 1:5 reveals the king's program. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. This wasn't just about education, it was about transformation. Even their names were changed. Daniel 1:7 tells us the chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. Their Hebrew names, which honored God, were replaced with Babylonian names that honored pagan gods. But then came the real test. The royal food looked delicious, and the wine sparkled in golden cups. Any teenager might have been tempted to enjoy this luxury after the hardships of war and captivity. But Daniel knew something his captors didn't understand. Some things matter more than comfort. Daniel 1:8 shows us his heart. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. The word resolved is powerful here. This wasn't a quick decision made in a moment of emotion. Daniel had thought this through and made up his mind completely. Why was this such a big deal? The royal food had likely been offered to Babylon's gods before being served. Eating it would mean participating in idol worship, something that went against everything Daniel believed. It was a test of loyalty. Would he stay true to his God or bow to Babylonian culture? The chief official liked Daniel, but he was scared. Daniel 1:10 records his fear. "I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you." Daniel was wise beyond his years. Instead of arguing or demanding, he proposed a test. Daniel 1:12-13 contains his proposal. "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." The official agreed, probably thinking this stubborn Hebrew boy would learn his lesson quickly. But Daniel knew something about God's power that the Babylonians were about to discover. Daniel 1:15-16 reveals the amazing result. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. God honored Daniel's faithfulness in a visible, undeniable way. The 4 Hebrew boys didn't just survive on their simple diet. They thrived. Their faces glowed with health while their classmates, eating the king's rich food, looked pale in comparison. But the blessing went far beyond physical health. Daniel 1:17 tells us, "To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds." God was preparing these young men for something incredible. Years had passed, and Daniel had grown in wisdom and favor before the Babylonians. But in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, something extraordinary happened that would change the course of history. The mighty king, accustomed to controlling everything around him, found himself confronted with something completely beyond his control, his own mind. Daniel 2:1 tells us, "In the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep." Imagine the most powerful man in the world, one who commanded armies and decided the fate of nations, being tormented by visions in the night. This wasn't just any dream. It was something that shook the very foundation of his confidence. The king knew this dream was significant, but there was one terrifying problem. He couldn't remember it. When he woke up, the images had vanished like smoke, leaving only a deep sense of dread and the certainty that what he had seen was of utmost importance. Daniel 2:2-3 describes his desperation. "So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, 'I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means.' But then came the impossible demand. The king didn't just want an interpretation, he wanted them to tell him the dream itself." Daniel 2:5 records his shocking decree. "This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble." The wise men of Babylon, who had built their careers on clever words and educated guesses, suddenly faced their greatest challenge. Their response revealed their helplessness. Daniel 2:10-11 captures their despair. The astrologers answered the king, "There is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans." For the first time, these supposed wise men admitted their limitations. Nebuchadnezzar's fury was volcanic. Daniel 2:12 tells us, "This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon." In his rage, the king condemned not just those who had failed him, but every wise man in the kingdom, including Daniel and his 3 friends, who weren't even present during this confrontation. When Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, came to execute Daniel, the young Hebrew's response revealed his extraordinary character. Instead of panicking or pleading for his life, Daniel 2:14 shows us his wisdom. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. Even facing death, Daniel remained calm and thoughtful. Daniel requested an audience with the king, promising to reveal and interpret the dream, but he didn't rely on his own wisdom or try to bluff his way through. Instead, he did something that the Babylonian wise men never thought to do. He prayed. Daniel 2:17-18 tells us, "Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon." That night, as the 4 young men prayed earnestly, God answered in a remarkable way. Daniel 2:19 records the miracle. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. The dream that had been hidden from the most learned men of Babylon was revealed to a Hebrew teenager who trusted in the living God. Daniel's response wasn't to rush immediately to the king. First, he paused to worship. Daniel 2:20-23 contains his beautiful prayer of thanksgiving. "Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him." When Daniel finally stood before Nebuchadnezzar, he was careful to give credit where it was due. Daniel 2:27-28 shows his humility. Daniel replied, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come." Then Daniel described the dream in vivid detail. The king had seen an enormous statue with a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of iron mixed with clay. A stone cut without human hands struck the statue's feet, causing the entire structure to crumble, while the stone became a great mountain that filled the whole earth. The interpretation was even more astounding. Daniel 2:37-44 explains that the statue represented 4 successive world empires: Babylon, gold; Medo-Persia, silver; Greece, bronze; and Rome, iron, followed by a divided kingdom, iron and clay. The stone represented God's eternal kingdom that would one day replace all earthly powers. Nebuchadnezzar was overwhelmed. This young Hebrew had not only revealed his forgotten dream, but had provided an interpretation that made perfect sense. Daniel 2:46-47 describes the king's response. "Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, 'Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery.'" Success and honor, however, didn't change Nebuchadnezzar's heart for long. Years passed, and the king's pride grew like a cancer in his soul. Perhaps the dream's message that his kingdom was temporary bothered him more than he cared to admit. Whatever the reason, he decided to build a monument to his own glory that would challenge heaven itself. Daniel 3:1 describes his audacious project. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. This wasn't just any statue. It was a colossal golden monument, 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, gleaming in the Mesopotamian sun like a second sun itself. Unlike the statue in his dream with its mixed materials representing the temporary nature of earthly kingdoms, this statue was solid gold from head to toe, Nebuchadnezzar's defiant statement that his kingdom would last forever. The dedication ceremony was spectacular. Daniel 3:2-3 tells us, "He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up." So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. The gathering represented the entire power structure of the Babylonian Empire. Every important official, every leader from every province, every person of influence, they all came to witness what the king intended to be the ultimate display of his glory and power. Then came the moment of truth. A herald's voice rang across the plain with an ultimatum that would test the faith of every person present. Daniel 3:4-6 records the decree. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." The music began, and like wheat bending before the wind, thousands of officials fell to their faces before the golden image. The sight must have been breathtaking. A sea of humanity prostrate before Nebuchadnezzar's monument to himself. But in that ocean of bowing figures, three men stood tall. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the Babylonian names of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, remained upright, while everyone around them fell down. Their refusal didn't go unnoticed. Daniel 3:8 tells us, "At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews." These were likely some of the same men whose lives Daniel had saved years earlier when he revealed Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now, perhaps out of jealousy or political maneuvering, they were quick to report the Hebrews' disobedience. Nebuchadnezzar's reaction was explosive. The same king who had once bowed before Daniel now flew into a rage at the defiance of these three young men. Daniel 3:13 describes his fury. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, so these men were brought before the king. The irony was striking. The king, who had learned about the God of heaven from Daniel now, faced three more servants of that same God, but Nebuchadnezzar decided to give them one more chance. Perhaps he hoped they had simply misunderstood or been distracted during the ceremony. Daniel 3:14-15 records his offer, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" The king's final question revealed his arrogance. He had forgotten the lessons of his own dream and the power of the God who had revealed it. But the three young men hadn't forgotten. Their response, recorded in Daniel 3:16-18, remains one of the most powerful declarations of faith in all of Scripture. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Their words contained both absolute faith and absolute surrender. They believed God could save them, but even if he chose not to, they would remain faithful. This wasn't just courage. It was the kind of faith that moves mountains and changes history. Nebuchadnezzar's rage reached a new level. Daniel 3:19 tells us, "Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. The king was so angry that he commanded the furnace to be heated to a temperature far beyond what was necessary to kill a human being. His pride had been wounded, and he wanted their destruction to be absolute and unmistakable. The execution was swift and brutal. Daniel 3:20-21 describes the scene, and he ordered some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The furnace was so hot that it killed the strong soldiers who threw the 3 men in. But then something impossible happened. As Nebuchadnezzar watched, expecting to see 3 men consumed by flames, his eyes widened in disbelief. Daniel 3:24-25 captures his amazement. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, Your Majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." The 3 men were not only alive, they were walking freely in the flames, accompanied by a 4th figure whose appearance was divine. The fire that was meant to destroy them had become their place of divine encounter. Years passed after the miracle of the fiery furnace, and Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom continued to prosper. But success, rather than humbling the king, seemed to inflate his pride even more. He had witnessed God's power multiple times, yet he continued to credit his achievements to his own strength and wisdom. God, in his patience, would give the king one more opportunity to humble himself through another dream. Daniel 4:4-5 records Nebuchadnezzar's own account. "I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at home in my palace, contented and prosperous. I had a dream that made me afraid. As I was lying in bed, the images and visions that passed through my mind terrified me. Once again, the most powerful man in the world found himself helpless before the mysteries of his own subconscious. This time, however, the king remembered his dream clearly, but when he called for his wise men to interpret it, they were as helpless as ever. Daniel 4:7 tells us, "When the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners came, I told them the dream, but they could not interpret it for me." The Babylonian wise men, despite all their learning and supposed connection to the gods, remained powerless to understand the divine message. Finally, Daniel was brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar's greeting reveals how much he had come to depend on the Hebrew prophet. "Finally, Daniel came into my presence, and I told him the dream. He is called Belteshazzar, after the name of my God, and the spirit of the holy gods is in him." Even in his pride, the king recognized that Daniel possessed something his other advisors lacked. The dream itself was vivid and symbolic. Daniel 4:10-12 contains Nebuchadnezzar's description. "These are the visions I saw while lying in bed. I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it the wild animals found shelter, and the birds lived in its branches. From it every creature was fed." The tree was magnificent, a symbol of strength, beauty, and provision. It provided shelter for animals, food for all creatures, and its glory was visible across the earth. For a king accustomed to seeing himself as the center of the world, this tree would have seemed like a perfect representation of his kingdom and his role as its ruler. But then the dream took a terrifying turn. Daniel 4:13-16 continues the account. "In the visions I saw while lying in bed, I looked, and there before me was a holy one, a messenger, coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, Cut down the tree and trim off its branches. Strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But let the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground, in the grass of the field. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal, till 7 times pass by for him. The holy messenger's decree was both judgment and mercy. The tree would be cut down, but its stump would remain, bound with metal to preserve it. More disturbing was the shift from it to him, suggesting that the tree represented not just a kingdom, but a person who would lose his human mind and live like an animal. When Daniel heard the dream, his reaction was unlike anything Nebuchadnezzar had seen before. Daniel 4:19 tells us, "Then Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, was greatly perplexed for a time, and his thoughts terrified him. So the king said, 'Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its meaning alarm you.' Belteshazzar answered, 'My lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies and its meaning to your adversaries.' Daniel's distress revealed his genuine care for the king who had become his master and, in some ways, his friend. Despite all of Nebuchadnezzar's pride and cruelty, Daniel had no desire to see him suffer. His interpretation was delivered with both honesty and compassion. The meaning was clear and sobering. Daniel 4:20-22 contains his explanation. "The tree you saw, which grew large and strong, with its top touching the sky, visible to the whole earth, with beautiful leaves and abundant fruit, providing food for all, giving shelter to the wild animals, and having nesting places in its branches for the birds. Your Majesty, you are that tree. You have become great and strong. Your greatness has grown until it reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to distant parts of the earth." But then came the warning. Daniel 4:24-26 delivered the divine verdict. "This is the interpretation, Your Majesty, and this is the decree the Most High has issued against my lord the king. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox and be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. The command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots means that your kingdom will be restored. Do you when you acknowledge that heaven rules?" Daniel concluded with an urgent plea. Daniel 4:27 shows his heart. "Therefore, Your Majesty, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be that then your prosperity will continue." Even in delivering judgment, Daniel offered hope. God's purpose was not destruction, but restoration, if only the king would humble himself. For 12 months, nothing happened. Perhaps Nebuchadnezzar thought the danger had passed, or maybe he convinced himself that his continued prosperity proved the dream wrong. But God's patience has limits, and his word never fails to come to pass. The fulfillment came suddenly and dramatically. Daniel 4:29-30 records the moment. 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, he said, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my Majesty?" Even after receiving divine warning, Nebuchadnezzar's first instinct was to boast about his own achievements. The response was immediate. Daniel 4:31-33 describes the swift judgment. Even as the words were on his lips, a voice came from heaven. "This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes." Immediately, what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from people and ate grass like the ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. The mighty king became a beast in the field, his reason gone, his pride stripped away. For 7 years, the man who had ruled an empire lived like an animal, a living testimony to the truth that God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. But the story doesn't end in madness. Daniel 4:34-36 contains Nebuchadnezzar's own testimony of restoration. At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At the same time that my sanity was restored, my honor and splendor were returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisors and nobles sought me out, and I was restored to my throne and became even greater than before. The king who had learned to humble himself before God found himself exalted beyond his former glory. His final words in Daniel 4:37 show a transformed heart. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. Through Daniel's faithful witness and God's patient discipline, the greatest king of his age had learned the most important lesson of all, that there is a king above all earthly kings, and his kingdom alone endures forever. Time moved forward, and Nebuchadnezzar had died. His kingdom passed through several hands before coming to his grandson, Belshazzar. Unlike his grandfather, who had learned to humble himself before God, Belshazzar was drunk on power and blind to history's lessons. The night that would seal Babylon's fate began with excess and arrogant celebration. Daniel 5:1 sets the scene. King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. This wasn't just dinner. It was a massive display of wealth and power, with the king drinking alongside his guests in unprecedented familiarity. Outside the palace walls, Persian armies were besieging Babylon, and Belshazzar knew his empire was in mortal danger. Instead of seeking divine help, he chose to drown his fears in wine and surround himself with illusions of invincibility. The banquet was denial disguised as celebration. As wine flowed and inhibitions fell, Belshazzar made a decision that would echo through eternity. Daniel 5:2-3 describes the ultimate sacrilege. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. These weren't just expensive cups. They were sacred vessels consecrated for worship in Solomon's temple. For decades, they had sat in Babylon's treasure houses as conquest trophies, treated with respect born of superstition and memory of Nebuchadnezzar's encounters with the Hebrew god. Now, in drunken arrogance, Belshazzar commanded these holy vessels be brought for pagan revelry. The act was deliberately blasphemous, a conscious insult to the god who had repeatedly demonstrated his power in Babylon. Daniel 5:4 tells us, "As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone." The contrast was stark and intentional. While drinking from vessels dedicated to worshipping the eternal, invisible God, they praised idols made by human hands, gods that couldn't see, hear, or act. It was ultimate human pride and folly, the created mocking the Creator. In the celebrations, Midst as 1,000 voices praised lifeless idols, something happened that turned revelry into terror instantly. Daniel 5:5 captures the moment. Suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall, near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. The great banquet hall, filled with music and laughter, suddenly fell silent as all eyes turned to see a disembodied hand writing mysterious words on the palace wall. The fingers moved deliberately, inscribing glowing characters visible to everyone present. Belshazzar's transformation was immediate and devastating. Daniel 5:6 describes it. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. The same king who had been boasting and blaspheming was now reduced to a trembling, terrified man. The mysterious writing consisted of 4 words: Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. The letters were clear enough to read, but their meaning was hidden. These weren't typical Aramaic words. They were divine code, a heavenly message in earthly letters carrying supernatural significance. Belshazzar summoned his wise men with an extraordinary offer. Daniel 5:7 records his desperate promise. Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the 3rd highest ruler in the kingdom. But human wisdom proved powerless before divine mystery. Daniel 5:8 tells us, "Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant." These learned men, versed in human philosophy and pagan religion, were blind to the true God's ways. The Queen Mother entered with crucial counsel. Daniel 5:10-12 records her words, "There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means." When Daniel arrived, he refused the king's rewards. Daniel 5:17 shows his integrity. "You may keep your gifts for yourself. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means." Before interpreting, Daniel preached, reminding Belshazzar of Nebuchadnezzar's pride, fall, and restoration. Then came the devastating accusation, "But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven." Finally, Daniel revealed the meaning. Daniel 5:25-28 contains the divine verdict. "Men, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end." Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Despite the dire prophecy, Belshazzar kept his word about rewards. Daniel 5:29 tells us, "Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, a gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the 3rd highest ruler in the kingdom." It was surreal, honoring a prophet who had just announced the kingdom's end. But God's word never returns empty. Daniel 5:30 records swift fulfillment. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain. The wall's writing wasn't just warning but death sentence, carried out with divine precision. Babylon's fall wasn't just a king's death, but an empire's end. For decades, Babylon had been Earth's greatest power, with hanging gardens among world wonders, seemingly impregnable walls, and immeasurable wealth. That night, everything changed. The Medo-Persian army, led by Cyrus the Great, had besieged Babylon for months. Citizens felt secure behind massive walls that had never been breached. Unknown to them, Persian engineers had diverted the Euphrates River flowing through the city, allowing soldiers to enter through the riverbed. As Belshazzar's banquet raged and Daniel delivered prophecy, Persian soldiers moved through streets like ghosts, meeting little resistance. By morning, the ancient world's greatest empire had fallen, exactly as Daniel predicted. Daniel 5:31 introduces the new order. and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. For Daniel, now probably 80, this transition marked another dramatic change. He had served Nebuchadnezzar faithfully, survived successor reigns, and witnessed the empire's fall that had shaped his entire adult life. The transition from Babylonian to Persian rule could have meant retirement for elderly Daniel. But he possessed something transcending political changes: wisdom, integrity, and administrative skill any ruler would value. Daniel 6:1-2 describes the new structure. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. Remarkably, despite his age and foreign background, Daniel was appointed as one of only 3 chief administrators in the entire empire. But Daniel's excellence quickly set him apart. Daniel 6:3 reveals what made him special. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. This prospect terrified Daniel's colleagues. Other administrators and satraps realized that if Daniel became sole superior, their corruption opportunities would vanish. Daniel's absolute honesty threatened their comfortable graft system. They plotted against him. Daniel 6:4 describes their search. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him, because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. They investigated every aspect of Daniel's administration, examining financial records, questioning subordinates, scrutinizing decisions. They found nothing. Daniel's record was spotless, supernatural honesty sustained by a lifetime of walking with God. Frustrated, they realized they must manufacture charges. Daniel 6:5 records their conclusion: "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." They would use Daniel's greatest strength, faithfulness to God, as the weapon to destroy him, creating conflict between loyalty to God and loyalty to the king. The conspirators approached King Darius with what appeared reasonable and flattering. Daniel 6:6-7 records their deception. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Their approach was masterful. They came as a group, claiming unanimous support while concealing they hadn't consulted Daniel. They presented the decree as honoring the king, making him sole worship object for a month. They insisted on irrevocability. Daniel 6:8, "Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." This was crucial. Once the king signed, even he couldn't change it. Daniel 6:9. So King Darius put the decree in writing. The trap was set. For 30 days, anyone praying to any god except King Darius would face the lions. When Daniel learned of the decree, his response was exactly predicted, yet still amazing. Daniel 6:10. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Daniel didn't panic or seek circumvention. He continued normal routine exactly as before, praying toward Jerusalem 3 times daily, giving thanks, even facing death sentence. This wasn't desperate crisis response, but continuation of lifestyle that had sustained him through decades. The conspirators watched and waited. Daniel 6:11. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. They caught him exactly as planned. Their trap worked perfectly. The conspirators wasted no time reporting to King Darius. Daniel 6:12-13. They reminded the king of his decree, then revealed, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. The effect on Darius was devastating. Daniel 6:14. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. The king realized he'd been manipulated into signing his most valuable servant's death warrant. All day, Darius frantically searched for legal loopholes, but the conspirators had crafted their trap too well. As sunset approached, they returned with pressure. Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. With heavy heart, Darius gave the order. Daniel 6:16. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." The execution was designed to be certain and terrible. Lions were kept hungry specifically for executions, and the den was inescapable. A stone sealed the mouth with the king's signet ring, but something unprecedented happened. Daniel 6:18. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night, without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. The king shared Daniel's suffering, fasting and lying awake in anguish. At dawn, Darius hurried to the den. Daniel 6:19-20. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Then came the voice like music from heaven. Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight." Daniel 6:23. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Justice demanded punishment for the real criminals. Daniel 6:24. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. After his miraculous deliverance, Daniel's influence reached new heights. But God had more revelation to give his faithful servant. In the first year of Belshazzar's reign, before the empire's fall, Daniel received a vision that would unveil future history. Daniel 7:1 introduces this prophetic revelation. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying on his bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. This vision was different from interpreting others' dreams. God was giving Daniel direct prophetic insight into future world empires and the ultimate establishment of God's eternal kingdom. The vision began dramatically. Daniel 7:2-3. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the 4 winds of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The sea represented the nations of the world in turmoil, and from this chaos emerged 4 successive beasts representing world empires that would dominate history. The first beast was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. This represented Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, powerful like a lion, swift like an eagle. Daniel watched as its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it, likely referring to Nebuchadnezzar's humiliation and restoration. The second beast looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. This represented the Medo-Persian Empire, with one side, Persia, being stronger than the other, Media, devouring 3 kingdoms. The third beast looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. This represented Greece under Alexander the Great, whose conquests were swift like a leopard, later divided among his 4 generals. The fourth beast was most terrifying and frightening, and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. This represented Rome, more brutal and powerful than previous empires. 2 years later, Daniel received another vision providing more specific details about coming empires. Daniel 8:1-2. In the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision after the one that had already appeared to me. In my vision I saw myself in the citadel of Susa, in the province of Elam. In the vision I was beside the Ulai Canal. This vision focused specifically on the Medo-Persian and Greek empires, providing remarkable detail about their conflict and Greece's subsequent division. Daniel 8:3-4 describes the first symbol. I looked up, and there before me was a ram with 2 horns standing beside the canal. The horns were long, but one was longer than the other, but grew up later. I watched the ram as it charged toward the west and the north and the south. No animal could stand against it, and none could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased, and became great. The ram represented the Medo-Persian Empire, with 2 horns representing Media and Persia, though Persia, the later longer horn, became dominant. The rams charging in 3 directions showed Persian conquests. Then came the ram's destroyer, Daniel 8:5-7. As I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. It came toward the 2-horned ram and charged at it in great rage, struck the ram and shattered both its horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it. This goat represented Greece, with its prominent horn being Alexander the Great. The speed, without touching the ground, depicted Alexander's rapid conquests, and the ram's destruction showed Greece's victory over Persia. But the great horn was broken. Daniel 8:8. The goat became very great, but at the height of its power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place, 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. This represented Alexander's early death and his empire's division among 4 generals. From one of these came a little horn that would cause great tribulation, persecuting God's people and defiling the sanctuary. This detailed prophecy about Antiochus Epiphanes and future persecution provided both warning and hope that God controls history's unfolding. As Daniel entered his twilight years, his heart remained burdened for Israel. Though he had achieved great success serving kings and influencing empires, he never forgot he was first a son of Abraham, a child of the covenant. Jerusalem's destruction and his people's exile weighed heavily on his spirit. In Darius the Mede's first year, something stirred Daniel's heart to seek God with unprecedented intensity. Daniel 9:1-2 tells us, in the first year of Darius, son of Xerxes, who was made ruler over the Babylonian kingdom, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood from the scriptures, according to the word of the Lord given to Jeremiah the prophet, that the desolation of Jerusalem would last 70 years. Daniel had been studying Jeremiah's prophecies, particularly the promise that Israel's exile would last exactly 70 years. As he calculated the time since Jerusalem's destruction, he realized the judgment period was nearly complete. This wasn't academic exercise. It was profound spiritual awakening that drove him to his knees. But Daniel understood something crucial. God's promises don't eliminate prayer's need. They inspire it. The restoration prophecy didn't make Daniel passive, but passionate. He knew God's predetermined plans are often fulfilled through his people's prayers. Daniel 9:3 describes his preparation. "So I turned to the Lord God and pleaded with him in prayer and petition, in fasting, and in sackcloth and ashes." This wasn't casual prayer, but extraordinary intensity. Daniel clothed himself in sackcloth, covered himself with ashes, and fasted, denying his body so his spirit could focus entirely on God. The prayer that followed was one of history's most beautiful intercessions. It began with worship and confession. Daniel 9:4, "I prayed to the Lord my God and confessed, Lord, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments." Even in distress, Daniel began by acknowledging God's greatness and faithfulness. He approached God not as angry defendant, but as worshipful son, understanding both divine holiness and love. Then came breathtaking confession. Daniel 9:5-6. "We have sinned and done wrong. We have been wicked and have rebelled. We have turned away from your commands and laws. We have not listened to your servants, the prophets." Notice the pronouns. We have sinned, we have done wrong. Though Daniel lived extraordinarily faithfully, he identified completely with Israel's corporate sin. This is true intercession. Standing in the gap as fellow sinner. As Daniel poured out his heart, heaven responded with one of Scripture's most significant prophecies. Daniel 9:20-21. "While I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, Gabriel, the man I had seen in the earlier vision, came to me in swift flight about the time of the evening sacrifice." Gabriel came at evening. Sacrifice time. Though the temple lay ruined and no sacrifices were offered, Daniel kept sacred worship rhythms in his heart. God honored this faithfulness by sending his messenger precisely when, in better days, evening sacrifice would have been offered. Gabriel's words were comforting and astounding. Daniel 9:22-23. "He instructed me and said to me, 'Daniel, I have now come to give you insight and understanding. As soon as you began to pray, a word went out which I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed.' As soon as you began to pray reveals something profound about prayer and prophecy. Daniel's intercession positioned him to receive revelation. God had planned this prophecy, but waited for Daniel's heart preparation through prayer. Then came the prophecy, unlocking redemption history's timeline. Daniel 9:24, 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. The 70 weeks weren't days, but years. 70 periods of 7 years each, totaling 490 years. This period would accomplish 6 things: finish transgression, end sin, atone for wickedness, bring everlasting righteousness, seal up vision and prophecy, and anoint the most holy place. Daniel 9:25-26 provided the timeline. Know and understand this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 weeks, the Anointed One will be put to death and will have nothing. This prophecy pointed directly to the Messiah's coming and death, providing the exact timeline from Jerusalem's rebuilding decree to Messiah's arrival, 69 weeks of years, or 483 years. The precision was stunning, allowing faithful observers to know when Messiah would appear. 2 years later, in Cyrus's 3rd year, Daniel received his final and most comprehensive vision. Daniel 10:1-3. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a revelation was given to Daniel. Its message was true, and it concerned a great war. The understanding of the message came to him in a vision. At that time I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat or wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over. This vision came after intensive spiritual preparation. Daniel mourned and fasted for 3 weeks, eating only simple food, drinking no wine, using no lotions. His heart was heavy, possibly over the slow progress of Jerusalem's rebuilding or concerns about his people's future. The vision's setting was magnificent and terrifying. Daniel 10:4-6. On the 24th day of the 1st month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, the Tigris, I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen, with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. This heavenly being's appearance was overwhelming. His linen clothing suggested priestly purity, his gold belt royal authority. His body gleamed like precious stones, his face blazed like lightning, his eyes burned like torches, his limbs shone like polished bronze, and his voice thundered like crowds shouting. Daniel's response was complete collapse. Daniel 10:8-9. I was left alone, gazing at this great vision. I had no strength left. My face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. Then I heard him speaking, and as I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. Even this mighty prophet who had stood before kings and interpreted divine dreams was overwhelmed by direct encounter with heavenly glory. The vision's power drained his strength and consciousness. After being strengthened by angelic touch, Daniel received detailed prophecy about future conflicts between northern and southern kingdoms, primarily referring to the Seleucid Empire, Syria, and Ptolemaic Empire, Egypt. Successor kingdoms of Alexander's divided empire. Daniel 11:2-4 begins with immediate prophecy. Now then, I tell you the truth. 3 more kings will appear in Persia, and then a 4th, who will be far richer than all the others. When he has gained power by his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king will appear, who will rule with great power and do as he pleases. After he has appeared, his empire will be broken up and parceled out toward the 4 winds of heaven. This referred to Persian kings, culminating in Xerxes, who would attack Greece, followed by Alexander the Great's conquests and his empire's subsequent division among 4 generals. The prophecy then detailed centuries of conflict between northern and southern kingdoms with remarkable precision. Daniel 11:5-6. The king of the south will become strong, but one of his commanders will become even stronger than he and will rule his own kingdom with great power. After some years, they will become allies. The daughter of the king of the south will go to the king of the north to make an alliance. These verses described the complex political marriages and alliances between Ptolemaic Egypt and Seleucid Syria, including specific details about royal daughters given in marriage to sealed treaties. The prophecy continued through verses 7-20, describing multiple generations of conflict, betrayal, invasion, and counter-invasion between these kingdoms. The detail was so precise that skeptics have argued it must have been written after the events. But the prophecy extends beyond any possible late dating into clearly future events. Daniel 11:21-35 focused on one particularly significant ruler. He will be succeeded by a contemptible person who has not been given the honor of royalty. He will invade the kingdom when its people feel secure, and he will seize it through intrigue. This described Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who would persecute the Jews terribly, desecrate the temple, and prefigure future persecution under the final Antichrist. The prophecy detailed his character, methods, and ultimately his defeat. The prophecy then shifted from historical description to eschatological vision, describing end times events. Daniel 11:36-39. The king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will say unheard of things against the God of gods. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed, for what has been determined must take place. This described the final Antichrist who would arise in the last days, exalting himself above all gods and speaking blasphemies against the Most High. His success would be temporary, lasting only until God's predetermined time of wrath was complete. Daniel 12.1 introduced the climactic period. At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress, such as has not happened from the beginning of nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. This time of distress would be unprecedented in human history, surpassing even Israel's previous sufferings. But it would also bring ultimate deliverance for God's people, those whose names are written in the book of life. The prophecy then revealed one of Scripture's clearest statements about resurrection. Daniel 12:2-3. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. This wasn't just spiritual resurrection, but physical awakening from death's sleep. The righteous would shine with heavenly glory, particularly those who had led others to righteousness during earth's dark days. As the vision neared its end, Daniel received specific time markers for the final period. Daniel 12:5-7 describes a remarkable scene. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there before me stood two others, one on this side of the river and one on that. One of them said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, "How long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled?" Two angels flanked the river, while the glorious being stood above the water. The question about timing was crucial. How long would these end-time events last? The answer was given with solemn oath. Daniel 12:7. The man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, lifted his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and I heard him swear by him who lives forever, saying, "It will be for a time, times, and half a time. When the power of the holy people has been finally broken, all these things will be completed." A time, times, and half a time meant 3.5 years, 1,260 days, or 42 months, consistently used in Scripture. For the final persecution period, the persecution would end when the holy people's power was finally broken, leading to their supernatural deliverance. Daniel still didn't understand completely. Daniel 12:8. I heard, but I did not understand. So I asked, "My Lord, what will the outcome of all this be?" And even after receiving such detailed prophecy, Daniel humbly acknowledged his limitations and sought further clarification. The response emphasized both mystery and certainty. Daniel 12:9. He replied, "Go your way, Daniel, because the words are rolled up and sealed until the time of the end." Some aspects of the prophecy would remain mysterious until their fulfillment. God revealed enough to encourage faith and prepare his people, but not enough to satisfy curiosity about every detail. Additional time markers were given. Daniel 12:11-12. From the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,090 days. Blessed is the one who waits and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. These specific numbers, 1,290 and 1,335 days provided precise timing for those living in the final period, though their exact meaning remains debated. As this magnificent vision concluded, the heavenly messenger gave Daniel final instructions for his remaining time on earth. The words were both practical and prophetic, addressing Daniel's immediate concerns while pointing toward ultimate fulfillment. Daniel 12:13 contains the beautiful farewell. "As for you, go your way till the end. You will rest, and then, at the end of the days, you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance." These words were deeply personal and profoundly comforting. Go your way meant Daniel should continue his faithful service without anxiety about future events beyond his control. His responsibility was to live faithfully in his present circumstances, trusting God with the future. "You will rest" was a gentle reference to death, described not as termination, but as peaceful sleep before resurrection. After a lifetime of service in foreign courts, Daniel would finally find rest from his labors. At the end of the days, you will rise, promised resurrection and reward. Daniel would not miss the final chapter of history he had been privileged to preview. He would rise from death to participate in the kingdom he had faithfully served throughout his earthly life. 2. Receive your allotted inheritance, assured Daniel of his specific place in God's eternal kingdom. Just as the tribes of Israel received their allotted portions in the Promised Land, Daniel would receive his designated place in the new creation. The prophecy emphasized purification through persecution. Daniel 12:10. "Many will be purified, made spotless and refined, but the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked will understand, but those who are wise will understand." Future persecution would serve a divine purpose, refining God's people like precious metal in fire. While the wicked would remain in spiritual darkness, the wise would understand God's purposes and find strength through His word. As we conclude Daniel's remarkable story, we see a legacy that transcends time and continues inspiring God's people. Today, Daniel's life embodied unwavering faithfulness in hostile environments, supernatural wisdom in complex situations, and unshakable hope in God's ultimate purposes. From his teenage years in Nebuchadnezzar's court to his final visions under Persian rule, Daniel never compromised his convictions. He proved that it's possible to serve faithfully in secular government while maintaining absolute loyalty to God. His influence on pagan rulers demonstrates how one person's faithfulness can impact entire empires. Daniel's prayer life sustained his public ministry. His regular communion with God equipped him for extraordinary challenges and enabled him to receive divine revelation. His intercession for Israel shows how individual prayer can align with God's redemptive purposes for nations. The prophecies Daniel received continue providing hope for God's people. His visions assured believers that despite temporary persecution and apparent chaos, God remains sovereign over history. Every earthly kingdom will ultimately give way to God's eternal kingdom. If Daniel's story has touched your heart and strengthened your faith, hit that subscribe button and join our family. Committed to learning God's word together, share this video with someone who needs to hear about God's faithfulness. Maybe a friend facing pressure to compromise, or a believer needing encouragement to stand firm. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming biblical stories. And leave a comment telling us which part of Daniel's story impacted you most. Was it his teenage conviction, his interpretation of dreams, his friend's faith in the furnace, his night with lions, or his powerful prayers? Like Daniel, you're called to be light in darkness and a faithful witness to the Most High God. The same faith that sustained him through trials is available to you today. May his legacy inspire you to live with unwavering conviction and unshakable hope in our sovereign God. God bless you, and thank you for joining this incredible journey through Daniel's life, the man who proved that faith really can move mountains and shut lions' mouths.